Before World War I, we could argue that trade was just as predominant a thing as it was before COVID, at least in some part of the world. Here we have total trade over GDP from 1890 to 2010 for a bunch of countries. You may say, look, GDP wasn't even invented before before the 20s and 40s, before the 40s. How do they have that data? How do we even have them measures anyways? Yeah, of course. Measures in the past mainly rely on some estimates, right? So these measures can be taken with a grain of salt, but there's pretty consistent trend that countries were fairly open in before World War I. And then countries were not so open, at least when we look at trade over GDP, between World War I and World War II. And then countries were back on being open again. But when you look at, for instance, at the United Kingdom, the level of trade over GDP was about 30% at the beginning of the sample. And it's the same number that we have in 2010. I hope that was surprising. So before World War I, what was fairly open. And it became a little bit close and then opening. And now for the last 15 minutes, we're just gonna look briefly at this history so that we know where we're coming from. And then for the next week, we're basically gonna try and explain different periods of this trade history. So the first period from 1890, or even before that, after there was like this golden age of trade, this first golden age of trade. Why? Industrial revolution. Countries starting to find again some productivity, escape the Malthusian trap, escape the poverty that they endured for the previous thousands of years. We have improvement in transportation, steamship, railroad. So imagine before this period, if you lived in Aarhus, you could only consume what was produced in Aarhus. If you were lucky on Christmas, you get something from Copenhagen. That was it. And then after this, you have railroads. So from Geringbro, you can move the palms towards the port of Aarhus, and then those palms go onto a ship, which gets transported to wherever, Sweden. We have the interwar period. Obviously, you can imagine during the wars, there wasn't really much trade going on, especially with your enemies. And then also the enemies will try to tank your ships. The main reason why the US entered the World War I was that Germany was sinking with its submarines, firing ships from the UK, carrying American people to other European countries. Okay? So not much trade going on there. But then during these two wars, there was a big recession. It's called Great Depression, started in 1929. You heard of it before? It's supposed to be super bad. When the people in your country don't have jobs, and you see that the people in your country are importing goods from abroad, what would you like to do to give those jobs back? Well, one way people think to do that is to prevent your country from importing those goods. If you have massive unemployed people and you're buying corn from Italy, stop buying corn from Italy and your people are going to grow some corn and going to have some jobs. So because of this recession, lots of countries, starting from the United States, also Canada, and also France, impose restrictions on trade flows. So there is a recession, unemployment, perhaps some inequality because, people were fine, right? The Scrooge McDucks of the US were fine, the poor people were screwed, right? And then what do the politicians do? They impose tariffs. And it looks very familiar, right? This sounds especially, all the, what they call them, sovereignist parties, all these parties from the right wing in Europe, and then Trump, right? This is the the logic behind the reason. And in fact, what do we have here is an average tariff worldwide. So the tariff is a tax that a good, that you have to pay when a good crosses a border. You can see it was fairly low in the middle of the 19th century, increasing a little bit up to World War I. This huge jump between the two wars, right? And then decline afterwards. Okay? So in the interwar period, there was not much trade. After World War II, countries countries were divided in communist countries. We're not going to talk about them. This for the time being. They stopped being communist countries. And then the other countries, they decided that trade was a good thing. And so they did everything they could to promote trade as much as they could. On top of that, there was this beautiful innovation of the container ship that produced tremendous increases in the efficiency of the shipping goods. And so we have growth in trade. And starting the Second World War going on. And then there is these continuous innovations in the export technology so that trade costs decline further and further. And then we have two revolutions. First one is the ICT revolutions, computers. The second one is the air cargo. Shipping on a plane components for manufacturing goods. You can imagine that if you want to import an intermediate good from China, and you have to rely on a phone, no internet, maybe a fax, and it takes a month to get anything from there, you need to have huge stocks of every input. Right? If instead you can shoot an email, detailed description of what you need, you get the product an hour. The day after, you need to have huge stock of inputs storing in your warehouse, right? Which were basically making you produce everything in the same place. When this is possible, you can fragment your production process. You can offshore part of your production process, your component production, intermediate production abroad. And that's what offshoring is, basically. And a lot of people say that this offshoring is the third golden age of trade. And to conclude, let's look at this typical example. Everybody here is probably familiar with the iPhone. Have you seen this figure before? The iPad. Where is the iPad made? Assembled in China, also now in Brazil, by a Taiwanese company, but designed in California. Okay? And everything else, whatever is in the middle, whatever is in between the design and the final assembly, where is that part made? It turns out that it's made in the world. Right? This is the big components of the iPad, the touchscreen, display, circuit boards, etc. Where are they made? Well, they made touchscreen assembly, China, Taiwan, India. Battery, Taiwan. The sensor printed circuit board. There they are. Italy, France, Japan, and the US. Then we have Germany, Singapore, Malaysia, Korea. Look at that. Samsung produced components that are used in the Apple iPad. Good. And we're not done yet. You see this little thing, this main printed circuit board, whatever that is, motherboard or something. That's also made by components that are also made in various parts of the world.